How to spot the 5 persuasion tactics used in investment fraud. Investment fraud criminals use a wide array of sophisticated and highly effective tactics to get people to part with their money. Learn how to spot those techniques and help protect not just yourself, but friends, neighbors, and family members. You will need a computer or telephone and healthy skepticism. Step 1. Don't assume a salesperson is legitimate just because they have a fancy title or a corner office with framed certificates. Fraudsters hope that if they look successful, you won't bother checking their credentials. Investment professionals, like brokers, investment advisors, and insurance agents, must be registered with regulators, such as the Financial Industry Regulatory Authority, the Securities and Exchange Commission, or your state securities or insurance regulator. You can verify a salesperson's credentials at saveandinvest.org. Step 2. Be wary of an investment pitch that guarantees a certain return or promises spectacular profits, what fraud fighters call phantom riches. No legitimate salesperson can make those kinds of promises. An ethical broker will admit that every investment involves risk. Step 3. Don't be swayed by a seller's claim that everyone from their mother to their mechanic is in on the deal. A pitch that focuses on who and how many people are invested, rather than why the investment is sound, should be viewed with skepticism. Beware of affinity fraud, investment scams that prey upon members of the same social circle, religious group, ethnic background, or other affiliation. Step 4. Refuse to be rushed into anything. If the salesperson says it's a limited time offer or that there's a limited supply of whatever's being peddled, consider it a red flag. The seller is attempting to make the investment look valuable by implying it's in scarce supply due to great demand. Step 5. Never feel obligated to make an investment because the seller gives you something free. Salespeople count on those freebies to guilt you into reciprocating. Step 6. Further educate yourself about fraud tactics so you can protect yourself and your loved ones. Go to saveandinvest.org/fraud center to download the Outsmart Investment Fraud Toolkit and order a free documentary, because knowing how to recognize investment fraud red flags is the best way to avoid falling victim to them. Did you know? Investment fraud victims are more likely to be male, live with 1 or more people, be married, earn more than $30,000 per year, and have at least a college degree. Visit saveandinvest.org and find us on Facebook and Twitter for more unbiased financial information.
My name's Elliott Greenblott, and some people call me Mr. Scammer. For the past 4 years, I've served as the AARP Vermont Fraud Watch Coordinator. And once again, we have a great guest today in Bill Carrigan. Bill is a Deputy Commissioner of the Vermont Department of Financial Regulation and specializes in the area of investment. So welcome again, Bill.
Good afternoon, Elliott. Thank you very much for having me down again. Appreciate the opportunity to share some time with you.
Thank you. I think we'll start just to refresh people's memory on what the Department of Financial Regulation is. Now, I've heard you present numerous times, and you kind of present the department as the lost soul of the Vermont state government, in that most people, even state employees, have no idea what you are or who you are. So why don't we just kind of refresh people's memory?
Sure. We are the Department of Financial Regulation. Previously, we had, there are some folks who knew our previous name, which was BISHCA. And we're big on acronyms. BISHCA stood for Department of Banking, Insurance, Securities, and Healthcare Administration. And a number of years ago, the Healthcare Administration was kind of moved out, so we needed to change the name. And as the rest of those of us that were still left, banking, insurance, securities, and captive insurance, are all responsible for the regulation and oversight of financial institutions. It just made sense to go with the Department of Financial Regulation. So essentially, the interesting thing is that within the 4 divisions, 3 of us are essentially publicly facing. Banking is responsible for the regulation and oversight of state-chartered banks and credit unions. They also do a lot of other things. They regulate mortgage lending, payday lenders. There's a lot of other entities that they get involved with. The insurance folks do our state domiciled insurance companies, as well as insurance agents, brokers, producers, both in-state and out-of-state. And then in the security side, we're responsible for the regulation and oversight of broker-dealer firms, investment advisors, and all of their representatives. Now, you've heard me mention this before as well. It's usually interesting for folks to hear exactly how many registered broker-dealer agents we have in Vermont. You know, you and I have talked about this. We have approximately 625,000 people in the state. We have over 110,000 registered broker-dealer agents here in the state. So essentially, there's one broker-dealer agent for every 6 people. They don't all live here. They're not obviously not domiciled here, but they need to be registered if they're going to conduct securities business here. And you touched on the fact that not everybody knows who we are, and that's true. I do a regular presentation for state employees that are either at or near retirement, and even a lot of the state employees don't know that we're there. And that creates a problem for us, because if you don't know we're there, you don't know how we can help you. So we, again, appreciate the opportunity to come on your show and hopefully enlighten folks to a little bit about who we are and what we do, and let them know that we are out there as a resource, all the divisions, and let them know we're here to serve them. So we, again, appreciate the opportunity to do that with you today.
It's great to have you here again, Bill.
Thank you.
You mentioned briefly this oversight of 100,000 broker-dealers. I mean, how many people are in your department to conduct that kind of oversight?
Yeah, well, nowhere near that many. Our division consists of 8 folks. Myself as the deputy, we have 2 individuals who handle the administration and the licensing and registration. So those 2 are responsible for approving every one of those registrations that come in. So 110,000 registered broker-dealer agents come through the queue, through the CRD system. And some of them have disclosure history and need to have a manual review done. And that's all done by these 2 folks. Then we have an individual who is our director of capital markets, who approves some of the offerings that are made in the state for things like real estate investment trusts and certain products. We also have a director of enforcement, which was my previous position. And we also have 2 examiners who report up through that individual, and they are essentially responsible for doing the examinations of our state registered investment advisor firms, approving the new firms, handling customer complaints, which is another issue, a big issue for us, and recommending enforcement actions if that's the case after an investigation is done. And then we have our research and admin person who essentially helps everybody in the division, is usually the first point of contact when people contact us.
So I would imagine that a lot of the work that you do has to depend on referrals from citizens who feel there's something wrong with their investment situation.
We do get a lot of information that way, and we implore people to do that, to let us know about things, obviously, that they may be aware of that we're not. We try to be, kind of on the cutting edge and out there and try to know what's going on, but it's a big state geographically, so we don't hear about everything. So we do rely on people to contact us and let us know about things that are happening. One is, I know, is something that you were very involved in with AARP, and that was the free lunch or dinner seminars. We've had issues in the past with some folks that were doing those. And I've actually attended a couple of those undercover, which is very interesting. But not everybody does what they should be doing with those. That being said, the majority of our folks here, whether they be on the insurance side, the banking side, or the security side, they're doing a good job. We don't have a lot of problems. Now, do we have some folks that stray every once in a while? Yeah, absolutely, like anywhere else. But for the most part, we've got good folks here providing high quality service to Vermonters, which is, our goal is to protect Vermont investors. That's our main mission. And then the other part is to provide a marketplace where people can come in both at the company level and the individual level, and make a living here in the state, providing a high quality service. So most of the time, they don't even know who we are.
You mentioned something that, as you said, is kind of interesting to me, and that is the free lunches.
Yeah.
I've gone to a lot of these, and I know you have. Basically, what's the motivation there in terms of the specific idea of giving the free lunch, and what should people be looking out for? Because quite often they come with a free lunch, but there's also, we'll give you a certificate for a dinner at a restaurant somewhere else, or there's a television set that you're going to get.
Sure. Most of these are done, so let me back up. Actually, these sort of free lunch or dinner seminars, as it relates to the security side, are supposed to be informational only. They're not supposed to be salesy. They're an opportunity for somebody to present some ideas and some aspects of a product, to let people know about it, how it works. If they're interested, they can follow up. That's the way they're supposed to be. Sometimes we find that they're a little more pushy, I guess maybe would be a word I'd use. They're oftentimes held at a pretty nice restaurant. So you know that the individual that's sponsoring this is putting up a pretty good amount of money to have people there in the first place. And nobody does anything for nothing. We know that. Oftentimes, the individuals that are in attendance are asked some financial questions, or they're asked to make a second appointment, which is fine as long as you know ahead of time what it is that you're going to be going to talk about. One of the issues that I had with one of these that I attended was that there really wasn't full disclosure. There were a lot of people that were asked to sign up for a second appointment and bring all of their 401k statements, their mutual fund statements, all this financial information. And the problem was that the individual that was putting on this free dinner seminar was only a life insurance agent. He had no securities registrations. So potentially they could be running afoul of our division because they're acting like an investment advisor. If they make a recommendation to liquidate a mutual fund, your 401k, your IRA, something that's held in a securities product, that would be a violation because they don't have the proper registrations to do that. And then the flip side is the product of choice for most of these is called an equity indexed annuity. It's not a security, it's a life insurance product. And not that it's a bad product, but it's, there's no such thing as a perfect product for everybody. So it needs to meet the needs of the individual. The individual needs to understand all the potential pitfalls or nuances of the product. And sometimes those aren't fully disclosed. So, for example, we had one where there was a bonus that was paid on any money that you moved over, but in order to actually get everything that you would think you were entitled to, you'd have to be in the product at least 15 years. There was a pretty high surrender charge, which wasn't disclosed up front. So, it kind of goes back to what we talked about, I think, a little bit last time, that investigate before you invest and understand what it is that you're getting yourself involved in. So with the free lunch or dinner seminars, we tell people, if you get an invitation for one of those, feel free to contact the division. We'd be more than happy to give you any information that we may know about them. And also maybe give you some ideas and some suggestions or things to think about before you go there. Because, and I know you're going to mention this, but there's, one of the techniques that scammers use is reciprocity. And that's exactly what you just mentioned. Because, we're taught at a very young age that if somebody does something nice for you, you should do something nice back. Well, the thought is that, they're giving you this really nice dinner, so you almost feel obligated to then follow through with another appointment. And you certainly don't need to feel obligated to do that. I did a seminar one time for a senior group in Rutland, and I think AARP was there as well, and a woman, because I asked if anybody received those invitations, and she put her hand up, and I said, well, do you actually go to the dinners? And she said, oh, yeah. I said, well, what do you do when dinner's over? She says, I just get up and walk out. I don't want to listen to anything else they say. So kudos to her. But you just need to know what it is that you're being asked to do next.
So a lot of these tend to be an attempt to do a one-size-fits-all approach, that there's a single product, and the attempt is to make the sales pitch to everybody at the same level.
Yes, yeah, and that's a problem, because these, there's a thing called suitability, and whoever is promoting these products should ensure that this product is suitable for the people that they're showing it to, and they're really not in these instances. It's kind of a blanket approach to everybody, and all these individuals really know about the people sitting there that night is that they responded to their advertisement or their mailer or whatever it is that they used. They really don't know much about those individuals. Yeah, and there is no one perfect investment for everybody. So.
Yeah, I think we see the same type of approach used, for instance, to market timeshares in condominiums, where people receive that letter, and it's not specifically, in this case, an investment matter, but it's the same type of pressured reciprocity that people feel.
Yeah, I mean, and you see this. I mean, a good way for some folks to think about this. We refer to when we're out there doing seminars, we talk about like Home Shopping Network or those kind of places where when people view the video from Finra, that talks about the different persuasion tactics, they'll see all of those in that, and people say, well, yeah, but that's a legitimate company. And I said, well, absolutely they are. But why do you think scammers use those tactics? And the reason is, and everybody says, oh, well, because they work. Yeah, that's right. So you need to be careful, because the tactics are very good, and the scammers essentially just can talk to you about anything they want. In fact, we sometimes refer to it as the fraud du jour, whatever is hot now. And we do have some of those issues that I'll mention to you in a little bit that we're seeing currently.
Okay. Yeah, I think in looking at that whole approach, that marketing, just contemporary approaches in marketing, can apply anywhere, and they can apply to the con artist and the scammer in the same way that it applies to, for instance, car salesmen or any other legitimate business.
Yeah, absolutely. And people sometimes don't realize some red flags don't come up, and hopefully after they get an opportunity to look at the persuasion tactics, they'll view these things a little more cautiously and maybe think about it a little bit more before they get involved in something that they may really not be familiar with.
One of the critical psychological factors that we've found is that people respond to the opportunity to get rich and get rich quick, and usually with as little risk as possible. And do you see that as an issue in terms of the investment world?
Absolutely, and we're seeing it now with some current things that we're working on. There seems to be whatever is old is new again. Things just come back. The scams that we saw 10, 12 years ago are now coming back again, and they're being targeted to a different group of people. One of the things that we see, especially towards seniors, is kind of a fear factor that if you have mutual funds or you have stocks, that you don't have time if the market, the market's going to go down, and they sell the fear factor that you don't have time to make that back. So you should liquidate that, and you should go into things right now that what we're seeing is precious metals, gold, things like that. And the problem is that these entities that are making these recommendations are not securities registered, but yet they're making recommendations to liquidate securities, which again puts them, if you remember.
So it isn't just what somebody's buying, but it's also what somebody needs to get rid of in order to make that purchase.
Exactly. And that's a problem because they're essentially providing unregistered investment advice by offering a recommendation on something they're not registered to sell, and they're having you invest in gold or something like that, but you don't really know, is it real? Where's it kept? Is there a custodian for this? And we've had a number of contacts to the division within the last 6 months with this. In fact, we recently took an action against a firm in Florida, and it's available on our website if folks want to go out there. They could see the order that we entered into against a firm in Florida who took advantage of a Vermonter. And we entered into an order against this entity.
So you're not limited to just functioning within the borders or the confines of the state of Vermont. When these things reach into Vermont from outside, you can then proceed and go for them.
Yes, yeah, we can. Just to give you high level, a couple of the other things that we did this year that we also are seeing, a little bit more activity, cryptocurrency. With the Bitcoin and things like that, there were a lot of sponsors that were doing ICOs, initial coin offerings. The SEC says that sometimes they could be a security, not all the time. We actually did a cease and desist against a firm in Florida that was reaching into Vermont via the web, and they were actually in California. And we issued a cease and desist order on them because they were essentially offering an unregistered security to Vermonters. And the problem is that these coins really have no backing, but they don't go in and provide full and fair disclosure. And the individual who was making this offering, the head of the company, was actually a Russian national. So there's a lot of problems with these. So we've had the precious metals, we've had the initial coin offerings. Anywhere where people can make money, they're gonna try to do it. If they're a scammer, there's a lot of legitimate opportunities out there, but you need to know what some of the red flags are, so you know the right questions to ask before you get involved. Because the problem is with most of these, once you've sent your money, it's gone. For the most part, because there really is nothing.
There's no way to retrieve it.
Right, there's no way to retrieve it. Most of the time it's gone, especially if it's offshore. It just makes things a little more difficult for us, yeah.
Another motivation that seems to be high on the scammers' priority list is to push scarcity.
Yeah.
We see it again in legitimate businesses too. When you want a particular product, it might be a car. You go to the dealership, they have one, and they don't expect to get any more.
Right.
So there's that feeling that I need to act now. Do you see that happening within the securities areas too?
We do, both in legitimate securities transactions. And in those that are scams.
Okay, illegitimate?
Yeah. So what I mean by that is you have a lot of folks that are looking for tax-free income, and the only real way to get that in a security is through a municipal bond. And we're a small state. We don't issue a lot. You and I kind of come from the same area down in New York, New Jersey. I got into the business actually with a municipal bond firm.
By the way, I'm a native Vermonter.
Okay, I'm sorry. You just have.
I know you're from New Jersey.
A Yankee fan.
Yeah, I know.
I'm sorry. I apologize. I'm not a native Vermonter. I'm a Jersey guy. But I started actually working in the industry for a municipal bond firm. And essentially, we had a book of folks that we would deal with, and the nice thing about the municipal bonds is that they would pay interest twice a year. It's called a coupon. We would pay twice a year, and it was free from state and federal taxes. So in Vermont, we also have them. We don't have as many. Right? We don't have the same volume of municipal bonds that are being issued. So you could legitimately get a call from a broker. If you're a client and if you're looking for a municipal bond, they could tell you, we have a very limited supply. We have maybe, 500,000 of this offering available to our whole office. So that could be a legitimate time-sensitive issue for you to make a decision. Either you want to invest in that or you don't.
Okay, so it's a legal scarcity.
It is. It's a legal scarcity because they only issue so many. It's not like stocks in a publicly traded company or shares of an open-ended mutual fund. You can constantly buy and sell. When these bonds are issued, there's only so many, And when they're gone, they're gone. And then, could you still get them? Yes, in the secondary market, and depending upon what interest rates have done, the value could be higher, could be lower. But initially, when they first come out, there could be an issue of time sensitivity. Scammers, on the other hand, use that as a tool, as a persuasion tactic. And I remember one in particular that was on a piece that the Finra Investor Education Foundation put out, and it had to do with rare coins. And the spiel was, there's only 4 of these coins left in the world that were ever minted. And so when I present this to folks, I say, well, think about that for a second. If there's only 4 of these left in the world, why are they calling you? Wouldn't they be calling a museum or, a coin to somebody? So that's just like one of those things that we kind of let people know that's a potential red flag, because as you're well aware, the scammers want to get you into an emotional state. They don't want you thinking logically. They want you dealing from a point of emotion, which is, kind of a big piece of the grandma scam, grandparent scam. Same kind of thing. If you thought logically about half of what they tell you, you would never do it. But that's not the way they want you to be. They want you to kind of get you all excited and your blood pressure's up. You're really not thinking.
We do have a term, okay?
Yeah.
And the term is putting you under the ether.
Yeah, that's it. Exactly right. Because you're not thinking the same way. And it really, then, you make a snap decision. And as men, we're often accused of this by our spouses or women in general, that we tend to make decisions based on emotion, and we try to back them up 3 days later with logic. So, yeah.
Another, I think, psychology issue that comes into play is when the scammer uses basically source credibility, the idea of their importance in projecting something.
Sure. We see that a lot, in the securities industry. A lot of folks call themselves a financial advisor, for example, and they have these nice titles like, they're a vice president or they're this or they're that. And those titles aren't necessarily based on any educational level or anything like that. A lot of times they're based on how much production that individual does. And we talked about source credibility, and that could be faked like anything else. We took action against an individual a number of years ago, actually, right around the same time as our Mac Parker case that we've spoken about, where the individual lied on his application to do business in the securities industry. He said that he had, this individual stated that he got a bachelor's degree from Providence College. So we had a conversation, and essentially it turns out that this individual had audited some classes at Providence, never really went and attended. So yeah, it was an interesting thing. But and I tell folks when I do presentations, I ask them who would like to be a Harvard graduate. And a lot of people put their hands up and they laugh. And I said, well, you could be. You could be in about 20 minutes. If you have a good color printer, you can go on the internet and you can find a diploma. You could insert your name and print it out and put it on the wall. Nobody's going to know unless they check. But now more people are starting to check because there's a lot of people that have done that. Interesting thing too on some of the video with excuse me, with the Finra program we were talking about. There was a woman who was victimized out of quite a bit of money, and when they asked her why she chose to invest with this individual, her response was because he had very nice shoes. So hopefully people use a little bit more before they make a decision than just the fact that somebody had on nice shoes.
You mentioned Finra a few times.
Yeah.
And for the sake of just explaining what Finra is, if you could take a minute.
Sure. Finra, again, we're big on acronyms in the industry. Finra is the Financial Industry Regulatory Authority. And essentially what they do, they're a self-regulatory organization. So all the broker-dealers, all the major firms, Morgan Stanley, Smith Barney, Edward Jones, Scott Trade, Ameritrade, all these firms are members of Finra. And all the broker-dealer agents that we talked about, they are all employed by Finra member firms. So Finra is their primary regulator. We, as the state securities division, are the secondary regulator for them.
So they self-regulate, basically?
Yes, yeah, exactly.
Okay.
That is what they do. And the Finra Investor Education Foundation that we talked about was formed as a result of a large settlement that was done a number of years ago with an analyst settlement. And there was a significant amount of money that was put into this pool, and the Finra Investor Education Foundation was formed from that with the intention of using this money to educate consumers on how to properly invest, things you should be aware of, red flags, and that's what they've been doing for years. And we in Vermont were fortunate that about 11 years ago, we had a deputy that was with the Securities Division who left the division and actually went to work for the Finra Investor Education Foundation. So we were one of the first 3 states that were invited to be part of this group. And we've been fortunate that we've had access to the materials and to all of their videos and all their information that we can share with Vermonters. So for a small state, it was very big for us to be able to have that opportunity. So, yeah.
I want to just touch on one other motivation or psychological point, which I personally think is maybe one of the most dangerous, and that's the idea of either social consensus or affinity, where people have this sense of everybody's doing it, or it could be, well, people in my particular group. It could be a church or synagogue. It could be a social club. Could you share some thoughts on that?
Sure. That's a big one because everybody kind of wants to keep up with the Joneses, and the thought is if it's good enough for these folks, it should be good enough for you. Affinity fraud is an issue. We see that we actually had an incident in this general geographic area about 10 years ago, where there was an individual who was selling seats on his board of directors. Right now, you heard what I said. He was selling seats on his board of directors. Most times, when you're invited on a board, they pay you to be on the board. You don't pay to be on the board. But it was the same group, a local group in this area. One of the individuals who was approached, was the father of a 27-year Vermont State Trooper veteran by the name of Bob Kalinowski. And it turned out, after we did the investigation, that there were a lot of other individuals who were part of this and who were victimized. And they all had ties to law enforcement. So they were all relatives of law enforcement folks. So scammers will pick, they'll pick a target group, whether it be, like you said, a church group or a synagogue or something. They'll inject themselves into that group of folks, and what they try to do is they'll locate who they believe to be a center of influence, somebody whose opinion the rest of the folks believe and trust. They'll befriend them, and they don't really talk about any sort of an investment for a while because they want to develop the trust. And then once they do develop the trust, then they'll offer them something. And it depends on what you're looking for, because most of the time there is no real product or revenue generating entity. A lot of these turn out to be Ponzi schemes or pyramid schemes or what have you. But if, for example, you're somebody who's a fixed income person and you usually invest in CDs, for example, CDs don't pay, they don't even keep up with inflation right now. So they may offer you something like, well, Elliott, we've been friends for a while. I didn't want to mention anything to you about this before, but we have an opportunity for you if you'd like, and it's very limited, but we have a fixed income investment that's very safe and secure and would pay you 6.5%.
Wow.
So we've developed this trust, and they normally start small, like maybe 5,000, 10,000, something like that. And the way a lot of these scams work is, if you are looking for a monthly income, they'll give you a check every month for what you think you should be getting. Now, you think you're getting a return on what you invested, when in actuality, all you're getting is part of what you gave them. They're giving that back to you because they want to strengthen that rapport, but then they're going to utilize your reputation to kind of spread the word amongst other folks. And that's how they kind of get everybody. And they'll usually go until either everybody's invested or they feel some pressure coming down. And then you don't see them again. They're just gone. And we had an incident like that here, that it was actually run out of mailboxes, et cetera, in Manhattan. Had anybody really Googled the address, they would have seen that. But it was a very what they felt was a prestigious address in Manhattan. But there were victims in Alabama, Minnesota, Pennsylvania, Vermont, and another Midwestern state. I don't recall which one it was. And the FBI got involved in that because of the size of it. And it turned out that they were able to track. I don't know if it was through IP addresses or whatever, but it traced back to Latvia and Eastern European countries. So a lot of these frauds are not perpetuated in the U.S. They're outside.
Which I would assume makes it even harder to crack down on when not only is the money gone, but the money is really gone outside the country.
Yeah, and Russia doesn't really care much about turning hackers over to the U.S. So, yeah.
Let's turn our attention to some of the, I guess I could call them classic scams. Mm-hmm. Okay, and let's start with one which I know you've had to deal with in the past, and that's either the Ponzi or the pyramid scheme. Mm-hmm. And we throw that term out a lot. Maybe you could explain what it really involves and
sure.
How that builds.
Sure. So the Ponzi scheme was actually named after a gentleman, and a lot of people aren't aware of that. They don't really know where the name came from, but there was an individual who was an Italian immigrant, Carlo Ponzi, and he came here, and his first scam was in international postage. So he was having people invest, or what they thought they were investing in, but it was he would get people to invest, and it was kind of what we had just talked about before, where you get some money back, and now you get other people to invest as well. And probably the biggest Ponzi scheme ever was Bernie Madoff. Essentially, he never bought one share of stock with all the money that was invested. Everything that he was sending people was all created in another floor of his office building on a dot matrix printer. People were receiving confirmations and statements, but he was never actually buying any stock. And so the money comes in, you pay this one, the money comes in from someone else, you pay someone else. And we've also had those here. The Mac Parker case we talked about was essentially a Ponzi scheme too, $28 million Ponzi scheme. We had another unfortunate one here a few years ago where it was a gentleman from Massachusetts who had family here in Vermont, and he actually took advantage of his own family and took their money. And there were a lot of really difficult issues with that one because of some of the money that was invested, in some cases, was actually money that was put away for a scholarship fund in memory of a young man not too far from here. And the parents, when they put the money in, had no idea that this individual was running a Ponzi scheme. And then they put the money in and everything was gone. So those are usually unfortunate because there's oftentimes there is no revenue generating entity that you can go back to, and once the money's gone, most of the time it's gone. So those are tough.
Pyramid schemes are a little different than that, right?
A little. We don't really see many of those on the security side. It's more the Ponzi scheme type. But in essence, it's kind of similar in that you know, if you're in first, you usually get your money back, and then it goes down, and the later investors are usually the ones that are left holding the bag.
So it's all based on the people who are initial to that scheme end up being rewarded by the people who are coming into the scheme later on.
Yeah, I mean, a perfect example of those who get in early getting what they invested back and then some. As it related to Bernie Madoff, there was he was forced into bankruptcy. And there was a bankruptcy trustee that was assigned to the case, a gentleman by the name of Irving Picard in New York. And he invoked something that hadn't been used in a long time, and it was called clawback. And essentially what that means was if you invested, I'll just use round numbers to keep it easy, if you invested $100 with Bernie and you received over the course of time $150 back, that extra $50 was deemed to be what's called an ill-gotten gain. And you weren't entitled to that because it really wasn't a gain. It was somebody else's money. So what he was doing is he was going back and actually clawing back that money. And if you recall, a number of years ago, the New York Mets had to sell a percentage of the ownership of the team. The Wilpons had to sell a percent. And that was why, because their mom had invested with Bernie. And Mr. Picard went and knocked at the door, and they had to come up with a pretty large chunk of change. And obviously, they didn't have that kind of money laying around, so they had to sell a percentage of ownership in the team to repay Mr. Picard. So it was interesting because that was at the same time we were doing the Mac Parker case. And once that hit the news, it was very difficult to get initial investors to speak with us.
Pump and dump.
Yeah. Pump and dump. Yeah. It sounds very sexy and exotic, right? Essentially what that is, and I'm investigating a potential incident of that right now. It's when you have someone, most oftentimes these take place in what are called penny stocks. So there's not a lot of shares. The individuals that are involved in these can kind of control the activity because there's not that many shares, and they can control the ups and downs. So what happens is you may have an entity, and The Wolf of Wall Street, the movie, was essentially this. It was a pump and dump where they bought shares in penny stocks that were very low value, had their brokers tout them, pump up the price, and once the price gets up, they dump the shares. So they lock in their profit, but now the people are left holding the bag because there really is no value in a lot of these. So they've artificially inflated the price just to get a gain for themselves. And then once that happens, the stock just kind of comes back down. So people, very rarely are they able to kind of cash out and break even. Most of the time they're gonna lose money. And that's an illegal activity, both at the SEC level, and obviously it would be in a dishonest and unethical practice here as well in Vermont.
So that type of scheme basically would be breeding on people's greed.
Oh, yeah, and it's a couple things. It's greed, and then it's also something that we spoke about a little earlier, which is scarcity, because there's not a lot of shares. So you're kind of pumping it up, and you're building up the excitement and the enthusiasm, and that's what's really raising the price, because, with stocks, it's supply and demand, like anything else. If you have a lot of supply and there's not much demand, price isn't going to move. If you don't have much supply, but you have high demand, the price is going to go up. Because as you buy, now the next time the bid is going to be higher. It's going to cost somebody a little bit more. And that's what they keep doing. And it just keeps moving it up. And then when all the shares are gone, they essentially, what you bought is what the company had a lot of times in their own supply. That's what they're using to satisfy the demand. And then the value just comes right down again. And people are, they're looking at it. If they needed a tax write-off, they just got it. for the loss.
Hopefully you didn't put it in a retirement account.
Yeah, there you go.
High yield investments. Is there something inherently suspicious or a problem?
Well, I mean, the name itself, high yield, means you're going to get an above market return, in essence. If you were, there's that, and you've heard the phrase risk return ratio. Well, there's not a lot of risk in a CD at a bank, but it also doesn't pay much. So as you increase the potential level of risk that you're willing to accept, the rate of return usually is a little bit higher. High yield investments have some things that people need to be aware of, and that's one of the instances where we strongly suggest that people do their due diligence.
Okay, so essentially they're not illegal.
They're not illegal, no. You have some bonds that'll be a little higher risk because the credit ratings of the companies that are issuing them may not be AAA, but it's one of those instances where you really need to do your due diligence and understand what it is that you're being shown. A lot of the, when I talk to groups, oftentimes when they hear that I've been in the industry before too, they say, well, Bill, what should I invest in? Well, first thing is there's no one perfect investment for everybody. And normally what I suggest and my what I say is that don't invest in anything that you don't understand. It sounds simple, but if you don't understand how it works, how are you ever going to know when you're going to make money, if it's something that's right for you, when you should get out of it? Now people say, well, that's what I have a broker for. And that's great. They should be there to assist you. But you should also understand where your money's going and how you're investing it. So that's just kind of one of my adages that if you don't understand it, don't put your money in it.
Okay. Here's one that I don't understand.
Sure.
So let's throw that. Promissory notes.
Promissory notes. Okay. So essentially, the easiest way to explain them is they're kind of like a CD at a bank, right? When you go into the bank, they have a 1-year CD, a 2-year CD, 3-year, and essentially the agreement is, okay, Elliott, you put your money into this 1-year CD. We are going to guarantee you X% of a rate of return, and at the end of the 12 months, you can either take your money out or you can roll it over at whatever the new rate is. So you're promising the bank that you will leave the money with them. The bank is promising you a certain level of return for doing that. Most of them have an early withdrawal penalty. So if you decide that you need the money after 10 months, you can get it, but you're going to pay a penalty for doing that. Because oftentimes now the bank has turned around, and if they're paying you, say, 2%, they've either loaned it out or put it somewhere else where they're getting a little bit more than that. So if they have to pull that out, they may have some ramifications as well. So that's similar to a promissory note. And in the Mac Parker case, that's what they were. They were promissory notes that he was writing to people saying that he would pay them X% rate of return for X period of time, and at the end of that time frame, they would be able to get their money back. So it's a promise to pay, but there should be something backing that. You want to make sure that you understand what it is that you're getting involved in. In Mac's case, it was the movie. Well, the movie was never finished. So
you're looking at something that may not even have any guarantee.
It may not have a guarantee, and there may not actually be anything backing it. It may just be
my word.
Right. It might be your word. You may be going out there and saying, well, here's the Elliott promissory note, and you can invest in this today and get a 15% rate of return. Now, 15% should raise red flags to folks, but there are still going to be people, because the two motivating factors for people are fear and greed. All right. They don't want to lose what they have, and they always want more than what they're going to get right now in the market. So that you may get some folks that would invest with you. And they need to kind of be careful. And we've seen this with crowdfunding, for example. There have been some crowdfunding offerings out there that people have just come out and said, I'm going to use this money to pay my bills or whatever. and people invest because they think they're going to get some money. Now, I don't know how you would expect to get money back from somebody who's just paying their debt, but you never know.
And that is also someplace where what we talked about before with source credibility can kick in, and people will say, well, he's an honest person, or he's somebody I know. Exactly.
And the somebody you know piece is, essentially what you have with that level of trust. Somebody's built up a reputation, or people feel that they're honest and trustworthy, but you still need to do some background on that and make sure that they've got the substance, either the substance behind them financially, they have the proper registration if they're purporting to be a financial services individual. So there are, no matter how well you think you know someone, when it comes to money, you really don't know them. So you really need to do your background research.
It's the money.
It's the money.
Okay. Affinity investment, which kind of fascinates me.
So as on the fraud side, so the affinity piece is, again, kind of goes back to, it's a similar group of folks, and sometimes one of the biggest areas where you see this for a while was with the Mormon Church, because they're a very tight-knit group of people, and you would have somebody come in and they would infiltrate, just like we talked a little bit about earlier, find the center of influence and kind of take advantage of everybody. And that's what they do. And that kind of the term affinity means just that. It's like a like-minded group of folks who are either members of the same group, or it could be a church, or it could be a senior center, for example, that can be victimized. And it's all, the word of mouth again, and the trust.
So I could also use something like an environmental issue and gather people around that particular issue who say, I'm really interested in protecting the environment, and this is the investment vehicle for you.
Exactly. There's some things right now, I think we all see them on TV, and I'm not in any way insinuating that they're a fraud, but you see now there's a big push to clean the oceans. So you have, there's a couple young guys that make it a commercial where they're selling these bracelets, and the bracelets are actually made of the plastic that they're taking out of the ocean. I don't know anything about it, but I've seen it, and that's, kind of that's what they're pitching to. They're pitching to everybody's psychological need to make sure the oceans are kept clean, and it may be perfectly legitimate. I don't know, I'm not passing judgment, but it's one of those things where, you'd get a lot of people pretty fired up about that. So it's kind of easy to raise money for those issues that we hold near and dear.
We've gone through a lot. And
we usually do.
Yes, I know. And I'm wondering if there are any other issues that you're seeing coming up in Vermont at this point that people should be aware of.
A couple of the issues we spoke about a little bit were people calling to speak about precious metals or gold. You really need to look into that. Look into the companies. When we talk about investigate before you invest, it's not just the individual; it's also the product that they're showing you. There's a couple ways that folks can do that. They can contact the division, and we can help them. As it relates to the individual, we could look them up on the CRD. We kind of talked about that last time, I believe. And as it relates to the investment, they can look at the EDGAR, EDGAR. Database at sec.gov. They can go to that website. They can put in the name of whatever it is that they're being shown, or the ticker symbol if it's a stock or a mutual fund, and they can get all the background history on it. And if it's a legitimate company, they can also look at all the financials that have been filed. So there's a way for them, to kind of take a little deeper dive into what they're being shown. So those are some of the things that we see. The other things are some basics. Like on the banking side, make sure you're checking your statements. Make sure that nobody is out there, essentially perpetuating an identity theft. Check your credit report regularly. Which we talk about whenever we do presentations. On the security side, make sure you know who you're dealing with, look into their background, check your account statements too, and make sure that everything is what it should be. And a lot of it, it kind of boils down to common sense, but common sense isn't common. So we all need to kind of think about this, and if something sounds too good to be true, it is, especially when it comes to money. Yeah.
Bill, I want to thank you for joining me today.
No, not a problem. It was my pleasure.
We see each other quite a bit, and the message here is so important that we need to keep people aware of what the red flags are in particular. But then we've mentioned repeatedly the need to contact your department, contact the other divisions.
Right.
If there's any question related to banking, insurance, investment, there are resources that are available, and they're local, basically, that can serve us.
Absolutely. One of the things that I hear most when people call, especially folks that have moved here from out of state, is they are amazed at the fact that we have folks like we have at DFR who are there to answer the phone and to help them rectify their situation, because in a lot of states, you're not able to get that access that you do here. So we implore people to take advantage of that, understand who you're dealing with, know that we're here to help you. And we need to know about it, because that's number one. If we find out about it early enough, we might be able to help you get your money back and get restitution for you. And then secondly, we can do something to the individuals that are perpetuating the fraud and stop them from, taking advantage of others.
And I think, too often people will feel shame or, embarrassment over the fact that they may have fallen victim. But that makes it even more important that they speak out, because from our research, we know that once you've been targeted and once you've been successfully scammed, the odds go up as far as being victimized another time.
Yeah, absolutely.
So,
that's true.
And then the public service part.
Yeah,
So I thank Bill for being our guest, and I thank you for paying attention to what Bill has to say and being with us today.
Thanks, Elliott.
You're welcome.